They called them the Hollowborn, not to their faces, but in the quiet corners of the valley, in voices low enough that even the wind seemed reluctant to carry the words. For 100 years, their blood never crossed a fence line. For 100 years, no stranger's name entered the family Bible. Faces grew sharper, then stranger. Limbs grew thinner, or heavier. The line twisted in on itself until it was no longer clear where father ended and son began, or where sister became wife. Yet every Sunday, they walked the same narrow path to the church, filed into the same wooden pew, and bowed their heads as if no one could see. But the church saw, and the church chose silence. The year the truth began to loosen from the valley's grasp was not remarkable for anything else. The river rose, as it always did in spring. The mountains swelled with green. The clapboard houses, weathered and tilting, stood as they had for decades, their roofs patched with tin and their porches sagging under the weight of too many years. But inside one house, the one set back from the road behind a line of black locust trees, the air felt different. Not colder, not warmer, just heavier. The family had lived there for as long as anyone could remember. The church records listed births and deaths like beads
Subscribe
on
to
a
my
single
channel.
string, the same surnames repeating until the ink faded to brown. Outsiders rarely came to the hollow, and when they did, they never stayed. Marriages were performed quietly, sometimes at the edge of the cemetery, sometimes in the kitchen with only a Bible and a trembling candle between them. The officiants were always kin. The witnesses were always kin. Inside the house, the walls bore the smell of wood smoke and damp cloth. The floors creaked with every step, as if the boards themselves knew the weight they carried. A narrow hallway led to the back room, the old room, they called it, though no one would say why. It was there the matriarch kept the family Bible, its cover cracked, its pages thin as onion skin. In its margins, the names of husbands and wives stood shoulder to shoulder with the names of their own brothers and sisters, their cousins, their uncles. No space between them, no breaks in the line. The deformities began subtly, a crooked tooth here, a limp there. Over time, they became more pronounced, shoulders too narrow to bear the weight of arms, eyes that wandered away from one another, voices that slurred as though the tongue were a foreign thing. Yet in the hollow, these were not called deformities. They were simply the family look. Sunday mornings were the same as they had been for decades. The bell rang over the valley, its tone worn thin. The Hollowborn walked the narrow dirt path to the church in a single file, the men first, then the women, then the children. They sat in the back pew, always together, always silent. The preacher's eyes passed over them without pause. The congregation did not turn to look, but in the stillness between hymns, you could feel the air shift, the way it does before a storm. The church had known for years. The elders had known longer. Some had officiated the unions themselves, out of pity, or out of the belief that God had placed the family in the hollow for a reason no one was meant to question. Others simply looked away. In a place this small, the line between faith and fear was thinner than the wafer on Communion Sunday. One evening, as the sun bled out over the ridge, the eldest son, though whether he was truly the son of the man he called father was a question no one dared speak, sat on the porch, whittling a piece of soft pine. The shavings fell in curls at his feet. From inside, the voice of his mother-wife, for she was both, called him in for supper. Her tone was weary, the kind of weariness that seeps into bone. He rose without a word, laid the knife on the railing, and stepped inside. The meal was simple: beans, cornbread, a thin stew that smelled faintly of fatback. Around the table, the faces reflected one another in ways that were not always comfortable to look at. The younger children's eyes darted toward the man at the head of the table, their father-grandfather, who spoke little, but whose presence filled the room. That night, after the lamps were turned down, the matriarch lit a single candle and opened the Bible. She traced the line of names with her finger, murmuring them under her breath like a prayer. At the last page, where there should have been space for the future, she hesitated. Her finger stopped on a name written twice, once his husband, once his father. She closed the book. The candle guttered. The room was swallowed by dark. In the hollow, darkness was not absence. It was a presence, a thing that lived in the corners, in the rafters, in the pauses between footsteps. It was the same darkness that had allowed the family line to fold in on itself for a century, under the watch of a church that preferred its own comforts to the cost of intervention. And somewhere, far down the ridge, a voice, half laugh, half whisper, carried on the wind, speaking a truth no one here was ready to hear. The first knock came in the middle of the week, when the valley was still half asleep, and the fog lay low between the trees. It wasn't a sharp knock, not the kind that demanded entry, but a hesitant one, like someone testing the air. Inside, the family froze. The youngest girl clutched her spoon as if it might serve as a weapon. The eldest son's whittling knife paused mid-cut. The man at the door wore a dark suit that looked wrong in the hollow's mud. He carried a leather satchel, the kind doctors once used. His hat brim dripped with the damp of the morning. When the father-grandfather answered, the man introduced himself not as a preacher, nor a census taker, but as someone sent by the county. The words hung in the doorway like a smell no one wanted to breathe. The county man asked to come in. He spoke with a politeness that felt like a glove hiding something sharp. He said there had been questions about the children's schooling, about health concerns, about certain patterns in the records. He did not say the word in breeding. Not yet. The father-grandfather told him the family was fine, that the church saw to their needs. But the man's eyes flicked past him into the dim hallway where shadows moved, the children peeking. Their faces, pale and strange in the half-light, told more than any paper in the county archives could. That Sunday, the Hollowborn walked to church as they always had. But this time, the preacher's voice faltered when he saw them enter. The elders shifted in their pews, and the county man was there, sitting near the front, his satchel on the bench beside him. After the service, he spoke to the preacher in the vestibule. No one heard their words, but everyone saw the preacher's eyes drop to the floor. When the Hollowborn left, they did not walk in a single file. They walked in a knot, the children pressed between the adults, the father-grandfather's hand tight around the eldest son's shoulder. In the weeks that followed, strangers began to appear on the road, not many, but enough to be noticed. They came with clipboards, with cameras, with questions that were too direct for this place. The church elders urged the family to cooperate, but their voices held no conviction. Some feared the law, others feared what the light might reveal. Inside the farmhouse, the matriarch began keeping the Bible locked in a drawer. At night, she would take it out, tracing the names as she always had, but now her hand trembled. The ink was beginning to fade in places. She began to fear that if the names vanished from the page, the family would vanish too. The county man returned in late autumn, this time with two others, a doctor and a woman in a gray coat who wrote everything down. They examined the children, asked them to read from a primer, to walk across the floor, to answer questions about their kin. The children's answers were simple, but the doctor's eyes darkened with each one. After they left, the father-grandfather stood at the window, watching their car disappear down the road. "They'll come back," he said, not to anyone in particular. The words were not a warning so much as an acknowledgement of something inevitable. Winter came early that year. Snow muffled the valley, covered the roofs, softened the edges of the world. But inside, the tension was sharp, cutting through every silence. The preacher visited once, bringing a sack of flour and a Bible verse about endurance. He did not stay for supper. Then, one night, the youngest girl woke to the sound of footsteps outside. She crept to the window and saw lanterns moving through the snow, slow, deliberate, drawing closer. Behind her, the matriarch's voice called her back to bed. But she stayed at the glass, watching until the lanterns reached the locust trees, and then went out, leaving only darkness. No one came to the door, but in the morning, there were footprints in the yard, many footprints, leading to the house and then away again. The church did not speak of it. The family did not speak of it. But the hollow felt smaller after that, as if the mountains themselves were closing in. The father-grandfather began keeping the children inside. The eldest son no longer whittled on the porch. The matriarch no longer lit the candle over the Bible. And yet, somewhere in the deep, cold earth beneath the valley, the roots of that family tree, tangled, knotted, indistinguishable from one another, held fast. Whether out of defiance, or fear, or a love too warped to name, they endured. Until the day came when the church could no longer hold its silence. The valley still stands, but the hollow-born are shadows now, some gone to the grave, some scattered, some swallowed by time's silence. The church that once kept their secret still rings its bell, though the sound carries differently on the wind, as if it remembers what it chose not to say. In places like this, truth does not vanish. It waits. Buried beneath the hymns, the pews, the weathered pages of a Bible no one dares to open. If you have walked these roads, or passed through a place where names repeat like echoes, some histories are not written in books. They are written in the bone. If you believe stories like this should not be forgotten, if you think the past should be looked in the eye, no matter how it stares back, share this story. Let the silence break.